Bird findings. A delicate, fragile eggshell consisted of a sandy color with many black and white spotted dots. The eggshell also has a smooth texture to it. A soft 3.5-inch feather that has brown spots. The feather has gray feathers at the bottom. The feather has a silk texture to it if you run your fingers up the item. Bone findings. A tooth that has sharp ends on each side. 2 individual bone matter is going up from the arched tooth. The main arch section of the tooth is yellow, meanwhile on top of the arch is white. The tooth has a slick texture to it with rugged sections. Vegetation findings. A dry and greenly piece of moss. Consisted of dried up little mushrooms on one side and small like twigs sticking up. The dried up green on top of the moss has a texture as if it was carpet. As far as weight, the moss has the weight of styrofoam. A group of weeds with long stems of grass are attached. The roots are brown and sticking wildly out vertically. There's flowers sticking from the grass. The bud of the flower is brown. Prominent spreading weed with long dark green stem, spreading into 4 cottony white seeds. Small dark green, rugged leaves are sprouting out of the stems. Pebble findings. The first pebble is a very rounded, smooth, dark gray pebble measuring 1 centimeter. The second pebble, the shape of a boomerang, and the color of a very dark brown. The pebble measures 1.5 centimeters and is very smooth.
We believe this is moss that was dug up from the base of a tree. The moss did not used to get tall in 2016. In fact, this is at full growth. The plants we found around the pond we believe are little weeds. We dug them up to include the roots so that we could inspect and analyze them. Weeds used to grow wild, and a weed is a plant that grows where it is not necessarily intended. This is a dandelion that was found in an open field. Dandelions used to be in abundance in fields. This particular piece is in its spore stage, and at the end of the spore stage, the spores would detach and be carried off by the wind. These small forms appear to be rocks found at the bottom of the pond. Rocks are very common found in the bottoms of streams, ponds, lakes, and oceans. They can be found in all shapes and sizes. We found what we believe to be a piece of a skull from a rodent. This was probably regurgitated from an owl when they could not digest the bones. This was found in the middle of a field. We found what we believe to be an eggshell from a bird's nest. We found this next to the feathers. The eggshell pieces can be found after a baby bird hatches from the egg. This appears to be a feather off a small speckled bird. Birds would molt and shed their feathers. They would also include them in nest building. We found this feather under a tree.
Back in 2016, Canada was considered a temperate forest. The average temperature of a temperate forest is around 50 degrees Fahrenheit. It was considered to be the second rainiest biome because on average it would acquire 30 to 60 inches of rain per year. They also had 4 seasons throughout the year: spring, summer, fall, and winter. The summers would average around 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and the winters would get below freezing. In Canada, you could find maple, elm, and oak trees. You can also find things like lichen and moss on the ground around the trees. The animals that lived there had to be able to adapt to the cold temperatures that they would get in the winter. In 2016, climate change affected allergies because of too much pollen. Spring, summer, and fall brought seasonal allergies to many people due to the particles being airborne. Back then, they assumed that since the temperature was progressively getting higher, then the pollen count would increase, causing more allergies overall. In addition to the rise in temperatures, CO2, which was consumed by plants, can cause the pollen count to increase. A person would attempt to better their health because it was known that the better their immune system was, the less likely it was for them to be affected by the pollen in the air. By reducing the community's CO2 emissions, the plants would intake less CO2 and produce less pollen, which results in a lower pollen count. If they would have taken more action to reduce the CO2 emissions, they could have made their communities a better environment to live in. A major concern in 2016 was the rise in sea levels due to climate change. When the temperature would rise significantly in areas that it shouldn't, glaciers and snow would melt into the ocean. They were all afraid of global warming getting so out of control that everything would end up underwater. Scientists have stated that global warming is man-made and that humans should reduce their CO2 footprint to prevent the ice caps from melting further. Communities recycle to reduce waste and CO2 emissions. Spending more time researching and collecting data from the area that is affected could have helped them further their knowledge of the issue. Because of the extremely high temperatures during the summer in the countries in proximity to the equator, many people were worried. Countries that were found closer to the equator seemed to have higher chances of heat-related deaths. The increasing temperatures in those particular thresholds is caused by global warming. People who resided in those areas were under constant fear that they were going to have health complications or even death because of extreme heat. Communities would face population issues because of the heat-related deaths. There weren't many ways that people in 2016 could solve the mortality rate, but they could have taken precautions such as less exposure to the sun.